Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Not Alone. I'm here with the perennial favorite Lana Patel, and I'm excited because we get to continue some really great conversations we've been having. Lana's been kind enough to talk to us about some of her experiences, and she's been kind enough to talk about just the ups and downs in her life and some of the super um, relieving elements, things like coming out to her eighth grade teacher and what that experience was like, but then not telling her dad about who she really is. And that's led to some really interesting conversations. You also talked a little bit about how you were removed from your school, and then you hinted at this idea of you were exposed or asked to, and I think asked might be a little bit of a misnomer, but to engage in conversion therapy. So before we start, Lana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Lana Patel here, pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently the PR and Government Affairs liaison for Plume. Plume is a digital healthcare company that's for trans folks, started by two amazing folks, one of them being a trans woman and doctor, Dr. Jerica Kirkley, and the other person is her best friend, who's also trained to be a doctor, MD Matthew Westler. And I work directly with Dr. Jerica Kirkley as her executive assistant, but then also doing PR and government affairs work.
And you've had your own journey, and that's the sort of
Yeah.
important part for this conversation. Um, Before we get started, Lana, do you want to tell us why were you kicked out of school?
Yeah, so I this was my ninth grade year of high school. So once I graduated, I was born and raised in New York City, grew up in Queens, spent my life in Queens, and when I graduated eighth grade, I moved to Florida, Polk County, Florida, to live with my grandparents. Um, and there is a church. I don't want to give them too much press, but if you do your research, I'm sure you can find out like which church I'm referring to. But there's this mega church basically owns half the town that I grew up in, and they have K through 12 school. They have a college. They have English church, K through 12, adult church. There's a Spanish church. There's a senior living center, like living community. There's a radio station, a bookstore. Like they basically own half the town, and they're like major sponsors for so many companies. And so my grandparents had converted over to Christianity. Um, my grandmother was born and raised Catholic. And she's Jamaican. Uh, yeah, she's like mixed Jamaican, white father, black mother. And then my grandfather, who's Indian, Punjabi, he was Hindu, and they both converted to Christianity. So they were attending this church, and they thought it would be a good fit for me to attend high school at this church, the church's high school. So I attended the school August 2002, and I started ninth grade. Um, and it was a completely different environment, going from being in New York City to being in very rural, deep South Florida. At that time, 2002, very different, very reformative, like beyond conservative type of environment. The reason why I was withdrawn from the school was due to the bullying that I was facing. And I was the controversial head at my school. Um, yeah, I was effeminate and constantly picked on because I was different. Um, and the kids used to just like constantly make fun of me. They would um, write queer on Post-it notes, slap them on my back. They'd call me queer in class. They would write queer on my locker. They'd break into my locker, write queer on my books. And at the time, we hadn't reclaimed the word queer, so it had a very negative connotation. And queer, especially in the South, was definitely not something you wanted to be called or associated with. And so that was something I kind of had to live with day to day. But there were two boys in particular that hated me and they wanted me gone. And they made school quite uncomfortable. I had PE, obviously, I had to change in front of the boys, and they didn't feel comfortable changing in front of me when they were aware of my sexual orientation. And they would always say, at least I'm still going to be here next week, you know, at least they would be there. So I knew that they were pushing to get me kicked out. And they pretty much got their wish. Yeah, one of them, the main troublemaker, this was like a private Christian school, so it got to a point where like I had to start taking Bible classes with the Bible teacher every week. I had specific like one-on-one classes to take with him. Kids will call me out in class and say that I had on makeup. I Before I knew it, I'd get calls to the principal's office. They'd ask me to wipe my face with like a brown paper towel. I mean, the paper towel was the same color as my skin. I was a pubescent child with like oily acne skin. Don't know what they were thinking they were going to catch on the paper, but they made me wipe my face anyway. And, it was just oil stains from, being a pubescent child. Um, and one of the guys, I think he got in trouble for, uh, I think calling me a queer or something. And so they would discipline the children by paddling them or hitting them. And so he got paddled. And one day I get a call to come into the principal's office. And uh, I go into the principal's office and I see my grandparents in the office. And my grandmother is sitting there with like bloodshot eyes, like they're red, and she's crying. And I don't know what's going on. And my grandfather's just kind of stoic. And I go to sit down, and they tell me that uh, they're withdrawing me from the school. And this was like November of my freshman year. And they said it would be better for me to leave the school than for parents to take their kids out of school because they don't want their kids going to school with a queer. So that was the executive decision. They handed me a box. I went to the locker room and I took all of my belongings and got in the back seat of my grandparents' 1994 green Ford and drove home. Um, and when that decision was made for me to be withdrawn, they also suggested that I enroll in their homeschooling program. So I had to cram a full year into one semester because I would start in January and have to do my whole freshman year in a January till May time frame. So I lost all like my credits that I'd been working on, and yeah, I had to start over.
I want to
Yeah.
ask a couple of questions about this experience so far because it's obviously quite traumatic. Um,
hmm
but let's start with, how do you identify? I mean, you've had some strong experiences with religion. How do you identify in terms of religion?
Yeah. I've kind of been all over the gamut. I Right now I identify as a Hindu, but I'm very spiritual. I, grew up with a Hindu grandfather. I had a Catholic grandmother. Uh, I've had Muslim relatives, Jewish relatives, uh, kind of everything under the gamut. And so I've gotten to learn different religions and spirituality. And I had a moment where I was probably agnostic, probably atheist as well. Um, and I've always just been like a student of the world. Like I've always been very intrigued by spirituality and faith. And so I did my own delving into other religions to learn what else was out there and maybe figure out something that would resonate with me. But I always found myself coming back to Hinduism. And so that's kind of where I am currently.
So what I find interesting is you found yourself coming back to Hinduism. So it wasn't a default choice, for lack of a better term. It wasn't sort of, well, my dad's a Hindu, so I'm going to be Hindu. You actively you explored, you came back to it. What about Hinduism spoke to you that maybe at this moment, if, at least, Catholicism,
Hmm.
well, Christianity didn't?
Yeah, I think for me, I was constantly berated by this whole idea of like hellfire, like brimstone, fire. You know, I was kind of indoctrinated once my grandparents converted into Christianity, dogma, whatever teachings were there. I read Bhagavad Gita, but I've also read the Bible and I've studied the Bible for several years. I know it inside and out from, Psalms, Proverbs, Genesis to Revelations. I've kind of done a lot of my own uh, theological work. And while I do like have a lot of respect and reverence for Christianity and Catholicism and uh, Islam and Judaism, it never quite resonated with me. And I felt like it was always a tool for control. Um, and I didn't like the idea of living in fear, constant fear, um, and having my identity weaponized. I think that was the biggest thing for me. And there was this quote that I still live by now, but it said, religion is for people who don't want to go to hell, spirituality is for people who want a peace of mind. And I always felt like hell was what I was experiencing on earth. Like to think of a life outside of this one where I'm gonna burn for the rest of my life. I mean, I don't know what the afterlife is like. I hope that that's not what's waiting for me, but I can't imagine um, that type of existence or a God that um, would punish their people in that way. Um, and for me, I felt like I need peace of mind. Like I've gone through enough struggle and trauma in this lifetime. I don't want to hold on to that fear of the afterlife and let that dictate me. And I've seen that, and we're going to get to the conversion therapy part, but that is a tool that's used so many times. I saw that with the Pulse nightclub shooting. I lived through that. I lived in Orlando during that time. I've seen how people use crisis and traumatic events and experiences to control people into Christianity or into like believing that there's going to be brimstone and fire and hell if you don't change your ways, if you don't conform to cisgender heteronormative standards.
So I went through my own struggle associated with religion, probably around when I was 15 or so. I'm Hindu as well. One of the things um, that I liked about it was sort of I think of it as the Wikipedia of religions. Different sort of cultures came through India and sort of added things to what is Hinduism. So most people don't refer to it as a religion, as you know, they refer to it as a way of
Hmm.
life. The part that sort of speaks to me about it is the idea that a lot of Hinduism. I mean, there are what are called like the books, the Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Atharvaveda, and the Samveda. But the point that I think is interesting is what most people even in India, sort of see as Hinduism is really governed by two big stories: the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The key piece associated with the Mahabharata that I think is interesting, that's relevant here, is the fact that the, it turns out that the Mahabharata is rife with multiple individuals who are, I mean, one of the main characters in the story, the Mahabharata, is this character who lived a life as a woman. She died purely so that she could kill a man in a future life, and she killed herself and she came back. So this idea of a woman trapped in a man's body is literally solidified in the stories. There is the idea of what's called a Ardhanareshwar, which basically stands up to half man, half woman, and there is there are multiple characters, multiple gods who meet that criteria. So this balance of the female and the male in the same individual. So I find that part of it to be quite interesting as well. But what I noticed is for you, none of those things were sort of dispositive. It was for you a different piece. So that you were just sort of, the idea of fire and brimstone didn't appeal to you. What I want to know is for other people who are listening in, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do hear
Mhm.
you basically saying that that wasn't the path for you. You didn't necessarily think that Christianity itself was bad, or uh, Judaism was bad, or Muslim Islam was bad. It was more, it wasn't the right path for you based
Mhm.
on your experiences. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess my question for you is sort of, um, has the role of religion in your life changed because of your experiences, especially through school?
Yes, I would say, ultimately, but no, at the same time. I mean, you like, two of my grandfathers, I mean, yeah, two of my grandfathers are Hindu. So I grew up with Hinduism. Those were teachings that I had. Obviously, there were things that, were imparted to me through religion, but then also things imparted to me through culture. Having them like live in the Caribbean, what Hinduism looks like for Indo-Caribbeans as well, and just kind of like the way of life. I think Christianity was something that was never, um, something that I had a chance to consent for or to. It was something that was just kind of forced on me. Um, but it also was something that was forced on so many other people, right? That's how colonization worked in a lot of spaces and countries. There's said your gods are wrong, what you're worshiping is wrong, like this is the way, the only way. And I think that was kind of the techniques that were used on me, and that all I that never really resonated with me. That didn't sit well with me. And
Right.
I think everyone should be able to find their own path and way. The information should be available to them, but I don't think scaring people into, converting to Christianity, to uh, having that Christian death and baptism, and say get being saved. I don't think that should be for some people. But there was a lot that I was learning as a child, even through like Sunday school, and how they would talk about religion and weave in politics, and there was very interesting, clever ways in which they kind of went about it, which never really sat well with me. And then my intersections, like knowing that the things that these people are preaching about and against is who I am, what I stand for, that these people don't accept me. And it was really tough for me because, yeah, I try to follow their path and their way, and I agreed to go to counseling every week, and I played by their rules, but it still wasn't enough. It was as if they wanted blood from a rock, and it was just like I can give and give, but that won't be enough, right? Like I I can try to be as butch as I can possibly be. I can pretend to be this person for these kids. I can learn the Bible 1,000 times, but who I am innately is that's just a constant. And I think in order for me to thrive in a Christian society, I had to experience a death, like let go of myself for the religion in a way. And it was interesting because it was, I think, the nephew of the principal, he used him as a reference, and he was very feminine. I don't know if he identified as a gay man, but I think he used him as a reference to say, oh, he's kind of like that. Look, being normal, right? I mean, I think I have pretty good radar. I think I sense my community, my people, and I immediately sense this is my people, my community. I don't know where they are now, but I it's heartbreaking to know that there are so many people that um, religion is weaponizing their identities to conform. And I think that was one person that then they try to use them to weaponize me to conform. Like, oh, well, this person is also like you. They're feminine, but you see, like he has a girlfriend, or maybe he married this woman, and you know, he sang in the choir. So yeah, he still partakes in like some things, but he is working very hard to be a cis het masculine man. And for me, I could not fathom growing up to be an adult male. And I could not fathom being with a woman. Like the idea of growing up and being a husband and father was just not on the radar for me. Um, yeah, there was a huge disconnect and just discomfort around that. So, hell or high water, pardon my French, I knew I was going to have to embark on this journey and do whatever needed to become the woman that I am today.
Um, I really was hoping we'd get into a conversion therapy because I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about because it is so controversial. But I want to ask another question about where we are, and we'll see if we can convince you to come back and talk about more of your journey. But I have a question about the two individuals who really sort of went after you. I don't like throwing the word traumatized around too easily, but they really went after you, made your life as miserable as they possibly could, and led to you leaving. I guess my question to you is, have you ever followed up to see where they landed up? Like I've always wondered if someone has such a visceral reaction to someone else, especially someone they probably barely know. It
Hmm.
comes from probably one of two places. Either they internally are processing something themselves, or their family is sort of sharing those thought processes.
Hmm.
So did you ever find out, like, did you ever look into it?
I don't think so. I mean, back then it was like, this is 2002, so this is
Right.
like archaic times. But now you're giving me some food for thought. Maybe I might want to look them up and see where they are these days. I think I remember at least one of their names. But yeah, I think I saw like maybe one or two of them. Or one, I think I saw one of them for sure after I left school. Um, because I think they used to attend the church as well, and it was very awkward because there would be like new kids that would come in, and I would have to sit in church every Sunday. Um, and word had gotten out to the kids at the church, so no one would sit next to me and no one would talk to me. They wouldn't share their Bible with me, and they would have an offering plate that they would pass around. And when it came to me, the kids would like pinch it with like their finger, their thumb and like their index finger, and like hand it over to me as if I had leprosy. Like I was gonna give them something. Um, and it was really isolating. And I know it kind of started with those kids, but um, I haven't really followed up with them since high school. So I don't know where they are these days, but it would be interesting and it would be ironic if they, were community or I don't know. Um, I wouldn't be surprised. I've had some interesting experiences post high school with people that turned out to be part of the community.
I mean, and it's possible that they aren't, but it's also
Yeah.
possible that their family, because you described them saying the family saying that, oh, we don't want our kid going to the same school as a queer kid at that point,
Mm-hmm.
being a slur, if you will. Um, so it's possible that it was just the parents were sharing that and came from a place of ignorance, for example. In which case, I'd be curious, like, they've had to evolve over the
Mm-hmm.
last 20 years.
I would
And
hope. I mean, I don't know. Polk County hasn't. There's been some revolution. Like, there's been some evolution. Um, but I mean, it's possible to kind of stay in that mindset. Like, that place kind of fosters that type of ideology. So I would hope that they've expanded their horizons past that. But
yeah.
um, yeah.
And the result of I do think that it takes a certain type of gall personally to say, oh, you can't be part of my school, but would you consider being part of my homeschool? And I was like, really? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a special type of gall at that point. I can
Mm-hmm.
go, I can logically frame around, you know what? I'm kind of against the idea of trans individuals. Whether or not I agree with that standpoint is besides the point. But that's a consistent position to take. But the idea that I'm against it, but I still want your money, it is
Mm-hmm.
kind of incongruous to me. Um, so did you mentally, I mean, obviously you're dealing with a lot, but did you just mentally laugh at the sheer duplicitousness of that?
Kind of. I think in part my grandparents wanted so bad for this to happen
Hmm. I'm sorry,
that
this. What is the this? The
this
homeschooling?
the not the homeschooling, but me being a part of this society, this
Got it.
community. My
Okay, got it.
grandfather, the day that they withdrew me from the school, he said, "This is our community. Please don't mess this up for us." So even though I'm your grandchild, I'm your family. You're Lokiakienge, right? You're so concerned about these other people, these like society, that you haven't even checked in with me to see how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, how this is impacting me. You're just so concerned about these people at church that don't really matter at the end of the day. Like they're not part of our family. And I think for my grandmother, it was this whole idea of like what that meant for me to be a part of this community, to have wholesome education. So I think like even though I went through this whole upheaval with going to the school, being picked on, being withdrawn, maybe this was like a second chance. Um, and so, there was a transition from going to school to being homeschooled, my grandmother teaching me, but then also kind of being in a very awkward space because there was resentment there for me being, withdrawn from the school. Um, and there was a bit of fear of, what could potentially happen for them having this queer child in this community.
On that rather depressing note, would we obviously have a lot more to explore. I honestly thought we'd get a lot further, but it's just so interesting talking to you and sort of delving into these conversations. Would you consider coming back to continue the conversation?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Lana, before we go, how can people reach you if they have questions, if they want to talk to you, or otherwise sort of reach out to you?
Yeah. Please feel free to reach out. Lana Patel. I should probably have a website soon. But yeah, Lana Patel. Google me. I'm kind of everywhere. But yeah. Or
Awesome.
if it's something Plume related, Lana Patel at getplume.co. But if it's outside of Plume, you'll find me on the web.
Awesome. Lana, thank you again for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you.